That was quick because Kelly's been married like a year. Oh, not quite a year. She got married, I think, last October. JD's
So tell me about this apple orchard. It was a 4.5.
And Kyle just graduated Auburn, so
So what was the problem?
I am not connected to the internet.
It's hard to believe we were using this.
it's a very crazy password, by the way.
I know.
Let's see now. Let's run that back.
Diener,
I didn't see any of that. I'm not that good at.
Well, only because somebody told me.
I'm not very good at license plate.
I have the password, Dr. Reed. I'll sell it to you for cheap.
Okay, I'll take it.
I got it right here. Oh, you got it.
Either way.
Yeah, read it, please.
Capital T, lowercase h, number 3, capital H, number 3, the @ sign, lowercase t, lowercase I, sign, capital O,
O or 0?
lowercase m,
Yeah, that's where I am there. I'm trying to get on. Well, I was already on, and I got kicked off. I haven't read it.
Any follow on this right here?
Good afternoon, everybody. If you take your seats, please. 1, 2, 3.
That's what you see in places like those and stuff.
We have a quorum. Okay, we have a quorum. I was a little worried, Dr. Mygrave, and that's okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Water Quality Committee, the October 9th meeting of the Water Quality Committee. My name is Bob Rubin. I'm chair of the Water Quality Committee. Dr. Mary Deerhake is the,
I'm not a doctor.
I'm sorry, Mary Deerhake is the assistant committee chair, vice chair of the committee. General Statute 138A-15 mandates that as the chair, I inquire as to whether any member knows of any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to matters before the Environmental Management Commission's Water Quality Committee. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest, please state so at this time. I don't have any statements, so I guess we can proceed. I'd like to open the meeting and with approval of the minute or the meeting summary from the July 11th committee meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the summary? Do we have a motion to accept the summary?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from the meeting.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? No discussion, so the motion carries. The meeting summary from the July meeting are accepted, approved. We have a couple of information items and a couple of action items on the agenda this afternoon. The first is to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission with proposed revisions to 15A NCAC 2H.0800 and .1100, and the fiscal note for the 2H 0800 rules on regulatory impact analysis for the 2H 1100 rules. It's an action item. Dana Setter-White and Cindy Moore from the Division of Water Resources will be discussing that, I hope. And there is no PowerPoint, is that correct?
That's correct. We just have a couple of items and hope we won't take up too much of your time. We actually came before you in May of 2017 and you granted that approval. Since then, we had the Rules Review Commission review both of the rules and provide comments just as a pre-review. And we also had our fiscal note and regulatory impact statements approved by OSBM. So based on those reviews, we just made a couple of changes we wanted you to be aware of. For the 2H 0800 rules, which are the laboratory certification rules, we simply repealed .0801, 0802, and 0810. And those were just informational type items. They weren't really rules. So based on the RRC comment, we just repealed those. Then we made one change to .0805 A7N, which was just to add a quarterly verification requirement for digital incubator and IR thermometers or temperature measuring devices. And that's because the electronic nature of those, they tend to go out of calibration more frequently. Do you have any questions about the 0800?
Anyone have any questions? Yes, sir. Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For new members like myself, I looked through all these rules and they look fine to me, but since I wasn't here then when he was going through the stakeholder process, I'm assuming that none of the labs have any problems with the issues that with the rules that are in here.
We actually did a series of stakeholder meetings across the state. We probably did about 6 or 7. We took stakeholder comment, we made changes based on those, and we actually even have support for the modest fee increase that we're asking for too.
That's all, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'll have Cindy come up for the 1100.
And I'm not here to talk about the 1100 rules. These are what we call the biological rules. It deals with the whole effluent toxicity lab certification. The Rules Commission had reviewed our rules and had just said, let's get rid of the scope. It's not really a rule, and so there's really no effect. The other thing that we had there, we had defined categories and parameters, and they just said, why don't you just delete those? It's redundant because we go and discuss those, define them in 1105. I guess the main thing with our rules is that we had referenced this certification criteria and procedures document in our rules, and they suggested that we take that and put it into the rules. So this was a policy that was signed by the director, so basically we're just codifying a policy that the labs have been doing since the beginning of time. So we just included that into the rules this time. So it made a lot of sense to go on and do. And y'all have any other questions?
Do any of the members have any questions? Okay.
And then, like I said, we're just asking for y'all to approve and move us along on into the EMC. Thank you.
Thank you. So we heard 2 presentations. The request is to proceed to the full EMC with the proposed revisions to the 0800 and the 1100 rule and the fiscal note. Do we have a motion to proceed to the full EMC?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that we proceed with 0800 and 1100, the full EMC.
I'd second that.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor of moving this to the full EMC? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the motion does carry. This will go to the full EMC. Thank you. Item 2 is the request to proceed to the EMC with the 2018 Annual Environmental Review Commission ERC report on the basin-wide water management planning. This is an action. A question, sir, or are you scratching your head?
Scratching my head.
Okay. This is an action item. Nora Deemer with the Division of Water Resources will be making a presentation to us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Nora Deemer. I am one of the senior basin planners with the Basin-wide Planning Branch. I currently cover the Neuse, the Tar, and the Cape Fear River basins. We currently have 7 planners, many of which do jobs outside of tasks of basin-wide planning. 4 of our planners are currently in the process of writing their very first plan. It is important to remember that basin planning doesn't have any rulemaking or permitting authority. Basin-wide planners utilize watershed characteristics along with water quality and water quantity data to understand current conditions and how they change over time, as well as work with the many stakeholders to understand these water bodies so we can include recommendations on how to preserve, protect, and enhance these systems. Basin planners work with stakeholders during the development of basin plans, and once completed, the plans go through a full internal and public comment period. We are happy to work with stakeholders to address their concerns and make sure their concerns are addressed as best we can. As you have seen in the previous commission meeting, and you will see tomorrow, our basin plans are changing rather dramatically, in how we're able to process and deliver data to the users of our basin plans. Our goal is to keep them up to date by linking interactive maps with the most currently available data. Each year, we are required to produce a report to the Environmental Review Commission on the progress of developing and implementing basin-wide management plans. Since the merger of the Division of Water Quality and Water Resources, we have worked to incorporate the 2 planning needs into a single management document. Okay. Basin planners are currently working on plans for the Broad, the Cape Fear, the Chowan, the Neuse, the Pasquotank, the Watauga, the White Oak, and the Yadkin. They are in various stages, some of which are just getting started and others are near completion. We also continue to work in all of our basins and subwatersheds. Activities occur that require attention and work with stakeholders. The 2017 report was approved in January of this year. The 2018 report simply added on to last year's report to include basin-specific activities and information that covers the time period between January and June of this year. You will find the new information added to the 2018 report in the orange font. So essentially, we took what was already in the 17 report because it had gone through January and just added the last 6 months of information to the report. Here. These are the portions of the legislation that spells out what must be included in our annual report to the ERC. The statutory requirements for the annual report include the progress on the development of hydrologic models, on the development and implementation of basin-wide plans, on our involvement in public education and outreach, as well as to report on the information regarding the concentrations of heavy metals and other pollutants in surface waters identified in the course of preparing and revising basin plans. These are the requirements that are needed in our report. The new information in the 2018 report include river basin specific information to address the 7 required components of the general statute for between January and June of this year. It includes a hydrologic model development update for the new Watauga and French Broad River basins, an update on river basin specific timelines and activities, as well as an update to the report that includes the final 2016 integrated report results and a timeline for the 2018 IR. On top of the legislatively required components of this report, we included additional information as requested by the Commission. Many of these items are not within the purview of Basin Planning Branch. We worked with Division of Water Resource staff to incorporate as much information about these topics as possible within the time frame we had to write this report. DWR would like to work with the EMC to explore other alternatives for capturing additional topics that go beyond the requirements of this report. We did our best to include additional information regarding, the new Environmental Justice Agreement, which was finalized in May of this year, activities associated with algal bloom response by the division, and the UCMR4 cyanotoxin assessment, recommendations to participate in stream cleanup programs, the new EMC Basin-wide Partnership Initiative, the update on the rules review and readoption process, the division's emerging contaminant monitoring program, Hurricane Matthew and DEQ's response plan for future flooding events. Last year, we were also asked to include discussions on sources of pollutants. So we included information on biological impairments and habitat degradation, nutrients and information regarding existing indicators of statewide nutrient status, algal blooms, impacts from land application of waste, emerging contaminants, and Hurricane Matthew water quality impacts. These are the areas in which there seemed to be some concern about the level of detail included in the report. Again, the report is meant to update the ERC on the progress in developing and implementing basin-wide water management plans and issues identified in the course of preparing and revising these plans. It is not an all-encompassing statewide water quality report. It is important to note that this report did go through an internal division-wide review process, and we closely worked with staff that provided information on the topics that are outside the area of expertise, and to make sure that we captured their work properly. All basin-wide plan-related information goes through public comment period as part of the basin planning process. I did, however, identify a few minor changes when I was reviewing the report this week. These include, I need to renumber the figures. Figure 1 was taken out of the document and put into the cover page, so I need to go back and renumber the figures. I need to swap Table 2 and 3, as Table 3 was discussed before Table 2 in the text. And on page 28, the current trophic status for White Lake and Waterville Lake is eutrophic, not oligotrophic, based on the 2017 and 2018 data. So I thank you for your time and for the guidance from Dr. Rubin. And we request your approval to take the 2018 annual basin-wide management report to the EMC for their approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or let me ask my question. How many comments or discussions points do we have? Yes, sir. Chairman, Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. I apologize for not reading the entire basin plan. I did go over it, and so my question would have been answered if I did my homework like I should. But when it talks about increasing public involvement, can you explain what you've done this year as far as trying to increase that? And the additional information that you did was excellent, I think, is what you included there. But how did you increase your public involvement and public education?
So we reach out to the stakeholders, and the watershed includes agricultural stakeholders, municipal stakeholders. We also do a lot of watershed group outreach and education. So depending on which watershed we're working in, those stakeholders are a little bit different, but all of us here that are working have done that this year.
And a follow-up to that would be, do you contact the regional council of governments, and do you contact the basin commissions that are established?
I believe so, yes. I have worked with the TJ Cog personally in my basins. I don't have any of the river basin commissions in mind, but I know the Catawba folks do work with those, and the Yadkin is working with the commissions that's formed there, so yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions, comments? Yeah.
I'll just take the opportunity to say that on the Hiwassee and the Little Tennessee, I agree with everything they've had there based on my visit this past summer. Definitely a sedimentation management issue, more installation of riparian buffer program methods would be useful. But I do think that it's clear to me that education of the landowners and behavioral changes, their willingness to install buffers is certainly an area that needs continued attention. The Savannah River Basin had great reviews, and glad to hear about the excellent bioclassification of the benthic macroinvertebrate. And of course, that's a very popular area for tourism, and we'll just have to be very careful about planning for new and modified recreational and tourism facilities up there. So.
Other concerns, comments, questions? If not, I have a few. This is deja vu all over again. I've had several comments from several outside agencies or outside groups wanting to have some more or additional input into the report. I'm going to take it upon myself to visit with them and get some of their comments in a little more detail. I promise I will have those back to you in a week. And I don't know if it'll result in major change. I don't know that I necessarily agree with everything that they're going to say, but I do feel as though I need to listen to what they have to say. A couple questions. One, you talk about the lake status, and I think that's really great. I know there are lakes around the state that can receive a lot of atmospheric input. And I'm wondering, is there any cooperation between the water quality people and the air quality people to look at windrows data to determine predominant wind direction and get some better ideas what the source of some of these nutrients and organics might be in some of the lakes around the state?
Well, I know the folks that did a lot of work on Falls Lake did work with air quality and a lot of the models that they have. That is something we can continue to do in the other basins as we're writing the reports. I don't have any specific information that could be added to this current report on atmospheric deposition to lakes, but we do have tools and we can work with air quality.
Yeah. We are going to be getting a report in just a minute about a lake down east,
right.
And I'm going to ask them the same question. You did mention that lake in your report.
Yes.
And that's why my concern.
Yes, and I don't think when we wrote, because that's in the TAR Pamlico, when we wrote the TAR Pam plan, we did not specifically look at atmospheric deposition to Lake Mesquite.
Okay.
But that is something we can work with in the future as we're writing our basin plans.
My personal feeling is that's something that might be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Okay, that's one. The other thing that I liked is you started talking more aggressively about emerging contaminants. And I don't know if Ms. Culpepper is here, but I do believe that is going to be a major issue that we have to start paying more and more attention to as a commission and as a department. So I was glad to see that in there.
And they will be written into the basin plans as
Yes,
well
ma'am.
as we understand the data that's being
Thank
collected.
you.
Yes.
And I think that's absolutely critical. That's something that we owe the public and we owe the General Assembly.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I was glad to see was you discussed the White Lake issues very candidly, very openly, and I was glad to see some discussion of issues with which there is a little controversy, and I think you handled those very well. I was asking for before, and you were holding back. I knew you had something to say.
No, not much, Mr. Chairman. I actually was triggered by your question about, or by your comment about the meetings. I didn't hear you say that you were going to request the committee to delay the forwarding of the report on to the commission for.
I am going to request that in about 2 seconds.
Will it have to go back? Will the report have to come back to the committee for reapproval before it can then be forwarded to the commission?
I will send the report, the revised report. The problem we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is due in the General Assembly on the 1st of November. I did my homework, but I've had lots of homework to do, and I have been quite busy for the last month and a half. Some of these issues came to light within the last couple of days. So we can either send it forward, we could delay it for a couple of days. I will make my comments to you all. We can send that.
That's why I asked the question, because I was going to actually make a motion to go ahead and approve the report to go to the commission, but I didn't want to intervene in your prerogatives in that regard. I was going to make a motion to approve sending the report forward to the commission. I thought that my comment was simply that I thought the report was very well done, and as you, I felt like they touched on issues that are issues that need to be discussed and need to be laid out in front of the public, which I really admired the content of the report from that regard. So it's mostly a process question, was my question, sort of, that the process question is, can we make an action that you can do what you need to do, but also doesn't hold up, sort of get us into another cycle where you got to wait another month to bring the report to the commission to go forward. That was very inelegantly stated.
Yeah. Well, I've got. Of course we can. Now, should I check with legal counsel before I say that? Yeah. So, if you want to make a motion that we forward this to commission and we go, that's fine. If you want to take a little bit of extra time to review, I absolutely promise that we'll be to the water resource people within a week, and we can meet the deadline. I just felt as though we should give some of the groups that commented some time. Yes, sir, Mr. Gillespie.
So help me understand this, because I'm sort of slow. If there's changes in the next week, how's the committee going to see them? You know, and if there is, so I don't understand how would we move it forward without having another meeting. So I don't know how we can do that. You know, if we have to approve this, I mean, we can't wait, and we got to have action on this to move it forward. I mean, as the chair, with all due respect, a week from now, you can't make changes without going back through this committee and the committee seeing it. And so that would put us off into November, which would delay the report. So help me understand that. How would that work, or can it work?
I would meet, I would discuss with the WR. We will make what changes are appropriate. You will get a copy of the report. And if you agree with the contents of that report, great.
Yeah. I don't know if we can do that legally.
That's why I was asking our legal counsel.
I was having a hard time identifying what the question was, but what I think it is, and I could be wrong, is whether the committee can approve sort of, I guess, preliminarily and delegate to you the authority to make changes. The problem with that, because that's what you suggested, is that you'd be able to make changes after the board, is the committee is not approving it for presentation and sending it to the General Assembly. The committee is approving it to go to the full EMC, and then it would vote on whatever final product. So, and to Commissioner Gillespie's point, once the action is taken, there can't be a subsequent action and it still have been approved. The approval wouldn't extend or cover any subsequent changes to the document. That would require another review. We can't modify the action after it's happened without some type of delegation of authority.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Dr. Mumford.
Maybe this is, Commissioner Gillespie asked my question more elegantly than I did, but would it be possible for us to go ahead and forward the report to the commission in its current form? In the meantime, you can have whatever conversations you need to have, and then at the commission meeting, you could say, well, I've had these other things, and therefore I recommend that the commission take the following actions to modify the report as it was sent to the commission.
In other words, amend it to do a...
Correct.
Yeah,
You could do that.
yeah. But that's not a week from now. That's-
Right, that's right.
Tomorrow.
Okay, and I fully understand that doesn't give us a lot of time to go and
There's not a lot of time in any
contact
of
those who are
that,
here.
but that would be, at least procedurally,
Okay.
I think, a more appropriate
Okay,
step.
well, I am the chair of this committee, and I can only vote to break a tie. So the issue is, we have an action item to forward this to the EMC. Do we have them? We've heard a presentation, we've had a little discussion. Any more discussion?
Not to prolong it, Mr. Chairman, but could I ask to bring up 3.7 on the impact from excessive flooding on the draft, on the report that was...
I don't have the report.
That's in my notes, and I just wanted other commissioners to see that particular piece of that
It's on
report.
page 14.
As I could bring that to light, please.
Oh, and by the way, number the pages.
3.7, impact from excessive flooding, hurricanes in parentheses.
Yes.
You see that?
Yes.
Mr. Commissioners? Okay. This report brings to light, being that you've included Cape Fear, Noose, lumber, but particularly the Cape Fear and the Noose being what Florence has just brought to our attention. Then the in reference to particularly on this one, the last sentence, it may take years to determine the long-term impact to the basins from such a historic flooding event. That was based on Matthew, but now we have another historical flooding event for the Cape Fear and the Noose. And biological monitoring will be done in the future to assess the impacts and recovery to the aquatic ecosystems. That is again relating to Matthew. So now we have Florence. So with any further ado, I guess I like the report as so presented, but being that that's on the mind and of everyone at this time, particularly with the water infrastructure master plan, could we, I guess, as a asterisk, or not certainly, Mr. Chairman, an amendment, but just as a note, as record, that as we proceed forward, as staff proceeds forward, that you take that particular impact of excessive flooding, hurricanes, and put that as a priority, and make that a priority in any studies that you're doing now for the ecosystems as you study, in particular, the Noose and the Cape Fear region. Mr. Chairman, that was just a part of infrastructure for the master plan moving forward, using the information that's going to be put together by staff with this latest hurricane.
So I'm not exactly sure.
Just a comment.
Okay.
I don't have any authority to say that we'll make anything a priority. I can certainly talk to my supervisors and the folks that do the assessments out and I'm assuming that they are making it a priority. Again, this report went through June of this year, so next year's report would include what happens with Hurricane Florence. But so the basin-wide assessment is done every 5 years. So they go out and they do biology in these areas every 5 years. So my thought was we would take that and we could see how things have changed and if there was a recovery afterward. So I would say, yes, it would be a priority. I can't make it the priority, but it can be my priority to report in a basin plan on what the results were from the studies that were done.
Well, I'm just as an add-on, I'm glad that that was included in this particular report, is that you have the hurricane,
Yes.
these excessive flooding, because eastern North Carolina sees those excessive floodings, particularly in these basins during hurricanes.
Right, and I would address these in the basin plan and looking at how things have changed over time and responded back.
And maybe pull some data from the current hurricane. Thank you.
And Commissioner Keen, I would note that that is a credit to the committee and the commission, because the committee and the commission were the ones who wanted to get that particular point included in the basin, in the report. So obviously some degree of foresight was in play there, so kudos to the commission, or to the committee.
Thank you. My name's Brian Rand. I'm with the Ecosystems branch in the Water Sciences section. And just to kind of give a little context on some of the follow-up monitoring, this year was the Cape Fear was actually in our rotation of basins that we did monitoring on. So we are going to have a good idea of what effects may have occurred as a result of the Hurricane Matthew. And we're currently doing our monitoring strategy for the next coming years. So we try to hit all those, as Nora said, we try to hit all those basins once every 5 years. I don't think we're going to have the resources to get to the Cape Fear again and in the news where some of that big flooding has occurred, but we'll certainly take that in consideration as we set up our monitoring strategy for 2019. So just to put a little additional information there.
And in 5 years, they will be back there, so we'll hopefully we have no more major floods between now and then, and we'll see a recovery.
Our track record on that's not so good.
I know, right.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to make a motion that we move approve this for transmission to the commission at our next meeting, with the understanding that, and while this wouldn't be part of the motion, I understand that you may want to look at that and may be ready to come back at the time of the commission meeting with a couple of suggestions.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm having trouble. I'm reading my screen and I flip down, and the next thing on my screen is groundwater. I'm reading the basin report, I'm sorry. The next agenda item is Lake Mesquite, and Lee Stevenson is going to talk with us about Lake Mesquite. Hi.
Hi. Hello, I'm Lee Stevenson. I work as an algal ecologist in the Water Sciences section of the Division of Water Resources, and I'm going to be giving you an overview of Lake Mesquite. This is one of the systems in North Carolina that is impacted annually by algal blooms. So I'm just going to give some detail on DWR's involvement in assessing these algal blooms and an overview of the system itself. All right, Lake Mesquite is the largest naturally formed lake in North Carolina, with an area of just over 40,000 acres, but with a relatively shallow average depth of just 2 to 3 feet. So it's a pretty unique system in its size and its average depth. It's in the Tar-Pamlico Basin in Hyde County on the peninsula between the Albemarle Sound and the Pamlico Sound. Although this lake was naturally formed, it's been heavily impacted by human use. It was actually attempted to be drained in the early 1900s. That attempt was abandoned in about 1930s, and it became the site of the Mesquite National Wildlife Refuge, which is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The primary use of this refuge is for overwintering habitat for migratory birds on the Atlantic flyway. Mesquite has a lot of different uses by the public. Birders, it's a popular place for birders to come and see the overwintering of the migratory birds, as well as just birds that are there all year round. There's a lot of fishing and crabbing on this lake. There's hunting lodges near the refuge or on the refuge, boating and kayaking, and agriculture. So you can see agriculture abuts the lake pretty closely in brown there on that map there. There's also just some general morphological things. Highway 94 cuts the lake in half. So you kind of have a western and an eastern basin. The two basins are connected through culverts that run underneath the highway, but each basin kind of has some unique water quality I will describe here in a second. There are several water quality concerns on Lake Mesquite that have come to light in recent years. It is impaired for chlorophyll A and pH. And one of the kind of more dramatic effects that we've seen is the rapid decline in submerged aquatic vegetation that has occurred on this lake. Beginning in the western basin in the 1990s, so you can see that figure is kind of illustrating the changes as aquatic vegetation was surveyed. Blue is very low coverage, and yellow and green is very high coverage. So you can see if you read that figure across that in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a lot of almost 100% coverage of SAV, and you can see in 2017, aquatic surveys found no SAV. So it's been a very rapid decline in the aquatic vegetation, which is a concern for migratory birds and providing habitat for them because they depend on SAV for food as they're overwintering in this lake. So that's a major concern on this system. And then what I'm focused on is this lake experiences chronic algae blooms every year. This issue came to light, I think, for the division in 2012, and I'll describe some surveys that we did there. But these algae blooms are cyanobacteria dominant, and some studies that have been done have detected cyanotoxins. And the previous two bullets, those effects can be directly tied to very high algal populations, so your chlorophyll A and your pH exceedances, and also the decline in SAV. If you can't, there's really no light attenuation, even though this lake is only 2 to 3 feet deep. Light is not reaching the bottom of this lake to support SAV. So both of those impacts can be seen and tied to severe algal blooms. And just to kind of illustrate this is a satellite image that's able to detect one of the pigments specific to cyanobacteria. This image was taken to focus on the Albemarle Sound, but you can see it captures Lake Mesquite, and you can see that it is just absolutely lit up with cyanobacteria. That bright red shows that there is quite a bit of algae in this lake of cyanobacteria. Okay, so I'm just going to go over a couple of the studies that the Division of Water Resources has been involved in, specifically with Algal Assessments. In 2012, the division was requested to do a special study on Lake Mesquite to assess differences in water quality between the eastern and western basin. So 3 monitoring stations were set up in either basin, and we were monitoring for a whole suite of water quality parameters, including phytoplankton or algal samples. That revealed that there was quite a bit of cyanobacteria in this lake. So some follow-up studies were done, not necessarily focused on the Division of Water Resources, although we did provide some support with phytoplankton assessments, but USGS and Auburn University between 2013 and 2017 were doing some monitoring on this lake. Specifically, Auburn University conducted a study on several lakes in the southeastern part of the United States, including Mesquite, looking for cyanotoxin occurrence. And there are also some studies done on crab and fish tissue to see if there are any subsequent effects from cyanotoxins present in the lake on the tissue of crabs and fish. And then in 2018, I again assisted with some phytoplankton analysis, basically to confirm that these algal blooms are still present and happening in this lake. And the photo at the right there, that's a 1 to 10 dilution. So to even be able to assess and count these algae and ID them, you have to dilute the phytoplankton samples. At least, I found at least 1 to 10. So there is a lot of algae in this lake. Here are a couple of figures just to illustrate what's going on from our phytoplankton assessments. The first figure is just showing a breakdown in the algal groups that are present by biovolume. You can see that cyanobacteria are making up the vast majority of the biovolume of the algal population. which is significant because cyanobacteria as a group tend to have a much smaller biovolume per cell, so there has to be a lot of cells to be able to outcompete some of those larger algal groups. And then figure 2 is showing, again, not a lot of statistics run in this, just to illustrate a trend from the phytoplankton assessments that we started in 2012 to that last point at the top from 2018, that we are seeing a general trend of increase in the biovolume of this lake even over the past 5 years. So again, take that with a grain of salt. This is just, flat averages from the work that we've done over the past 5 years. All right, so from all these studies that have been conducted, I just pulled out a couple of summary points. The first, which you're probably well aware of from my previous statements, there are chronic cyanobacterial blooms on Lake Mesquite, which peak between May and October, which is our productive season, which is typical. From the Auburn University study, they did detect 2 types of cyanotoxins, Cylindrospermopsin with a max concentration of 7 micrograms per liter, and microcystins with a max of 0.6 micrograms per liter. What's interesting is from the Auburn study, they found that Mesquite had the highest, by quite a large margin, occurrence of Cylindrospermopsin, which is one of the less known and less studied of the cyanotoxins, but then also microcystins. Also to note, neither of these have exceeded draft criteria for recreational exposure, but with it being an issue, that's not out of the realm of possibility that it could exceed some recreational health guidelines. Yeah, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put out a summary report last year with their cyanotoxin study and their crab and fish tissue study. Their main points were health risks from recreational exposure to cyanotoxins were considered to be minimal. I think mostly because there's not a lot of swimming and direct contact with this lake, but most of the contact is shoreline contact or kayaking and canoeing. They also found that from the tissue study that there were minimal health risks from crab and fish consumption based on your kind of typical consumption of an average human being fishing or crabbing on this lake. So there were minimal health risks from that. The reason this has been put on DWR's radar is because we were approached in June of 2018 for guidance on posting this lake for harmful algal bloom advisory. And they were basing their desire to post this lake on historical phytoplankton and cyanotoxin data, not necessarily data that was collected in 2018, but the prior years, and also meter data from 2018 showing elevated algal productivity as seen by elevated dissolved oxygen and pH. The national refuges have an internal process for posting a lake or posting HAB advisories, and part of that is to go to state water quality entities to work alongside. Our policy, Division of Water Resources policy, is to defer to the water body managers whether they want to post the lake. So we'll provide phytoplankton assessments, and we've started to provide some microcystin analysis, but we basically turn it over to the managers of that water body to actually post their lake. And then we did our assessments this year just to confirm that there was cyanobacteria and to have some data to support if they wanted to actually post the lake. The last I heard, they hadn't officially posted the lake for cyanobacteria. I've been trying to contact and confirm that that's true, but I assume Florence kind of diverted a lot of the attention from this issue to other issues occurring in that area. And this is not something I'm directly involved in, but something that I think is important. There is an active effort in this area to create a watershed restoration plan with several entities listed there at the bottom of the screen who are involved in developing this plan. There's a great, and if you have access to this PowerPoint, you can access their website. It gives a great overview of the history of the lake, the water quality issues, and some of the other issues, and how they're going about developing this plan. But the main points of the plan are, first, to protect a way of life in Hyde County. There's a lot of uses of this lake, and they want to make sure that all the stakeholders are well represented in developing this plan. Reduce the flooding. This area has a fairly low, I think it's only 5 feet above sea level, so they do have some issues with flooding that impact folks living around this area. And then to restore water quality, which is, there's obvious some issues with water quality, so they're looking to restore that by reducing nutrients and sediments, trying to control some of those algal blooms, and getting some of that clarity to re-support the SAV. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The two slides in the presentation that were really pretty alarming were the slides that showed the progression of the die-off with submerged aquatic vegetation in a relatively short, what seemed like a relatively short period of time, as well as the continued trend line on algal biovolume, both of which suggest this is a lake that seems to have just kind of spiraled down in terms of real issues of water quality. I don't want to ask you to speculate, but it sounds like those are linked in some way to nutrients. And my question really is, what changed?
I'm not sure exactly what maybe started this spiraling, or I don't have as much of a history of kind of the watershed. In general, I do know with SAV, it is a positive feedback loop. So when you start losing submerged aquatic vegetation, you lose some of the rooting system. With such a shallow lake, that allows sediments to be loose, then you lose more turbidity and get some stuff kicked up. So it is a positive feedback loop, so this rapid decline isn't necessarily surprising once you get on that track. But as far as what changed, I don't have the history of the watershed to know exactly.
And because the lake's been managed basically as wildlife refuge for a long time, so certainly activities in the immediate vicinity of the lake, I wouldn't think would have changed much. Well, that's a question.
So you can see that the boundary of the refuge
okay.
is that black and white line that surrounds, so it is just kind of around the border of the
I
lake.
see,
So
okay.
they might not have as much
Okay,
control
so
of the
that's really quite,
watershed.
okay, so that's really quite, it's really quite limited with the other land uses, but but the progress, it's, can you go the one slide further beyond that? Yeah, there.
This one here.
Okay, so the concerns with the SAV started in the west end of the lake and moved into the east end, looks like, just from the progression. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's stated in their report too, that the decline was first noted in the western basin and then was noted in the eastern basin.
And when at the end of in your last slide, you noted that the various stakeholders were working to try to develop a strategy. Yeah, that one. A strategy to try to protect the way of life, reduce flooding, and restore water quality, particularly the latter one. Are there specific steps that are being considered in the restoration plan, or is it too early to get to that?
I'm not directly involved and don't have an in-depth view of how that restoration plan is being developed. I believe Pete Campbell with the Wildlife or Fish and Wildlife Service is going to be maybe speaking next in November. Would be able to give a much more in-depth view of that restoration plan than I can provide.
Well, I really appreciate the presentation. I just had no idea. This is really that's quite a story. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up with the perimeter that you've indicated here, determining that perimeter, the last slide that you... Preservation and working with the restoration plan, who determined the outer limits there for that plan? Who determined? Did the county determine that, or did we determine the outer limits?
It's probably Fish and Wildlife, because that's the outer boundary of.
Okay, so as far as anything migrating in water or in groundwater outside of that perimeter, would there be monitoring stations or monitoring wells to determine migration effects in either direction?
I don't have the background information of what the monitoring that's being done. I believe USGS is the main entity that's doing the monitoring there. I should note something that I forgot to mention is there are canals that connect Lake Mesquite to Alligator River, which flows into Albemarle Sound, and to the Pamlico Sound. So there is not just that small watershed. There could be outside influences. But as far as the monitoring efforts that are happening now, I don't have any information on that personally.
Mr. Chairman, my thought process is moving towards a solution-oriented way of thinking, to just not monitor it, but follow the history, as the first slide indicated, from a date to an end date, and then through a restoration plan, seeing the plan scientifically to see in-ground water being moved is so shallow, you're going to have groundwater effect. How far is it going to migrate outside the limits that's indicated on that slide? Where will it be in 5 years? You've given a good example on the first slide to see it over a period of time. But I'm concerned here about restoration plan, a master plan, to see how far out groundwater would be affected outside of what's there. Because you've got the water piece, and you've got the ground piece, and then in 10 years, how big is that ground piece? How big is it going to be? And who has determined that outer boundary? And seeing the plan on that, and seeing how they are anticipating moving forward, and how they're going to monitor that.
Yeah, and the folks who are developing this restoration plan probably have considered all of those things, and I believe Pete Campbell will be able to, if he gets to present, will be able to give you more information as far as that restoration plan goes.
Gotcha.
I only know the algae, so.
Sure, I understand. But that was just on the slide there that indicated a plan. So working with, again, the governments of Hyde County, and certainly seeing the commerce piece, the industrial piece, natural resource piece, and with the dikes and so forth, canals, reducing flooding and helping the farmers and all of the agriculture that goes with it. But seeing the big 30,000-foot shot, that plan indicates a boundary, and the first slide indicated a history of the water, and now we've got a boundary outside the water line, and seeing how, in what resources that, if it's a federal piece, what resources is the state going to need to come up with to help participate in this restoration plan? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Jerry.
I'll begin by saying I'm not sure why the Department of Environmental Quality isn't participating in the restoration planning. I think they could play a valuable role because they certainly have oversight over the most likely nitrogen sources that are leading and loading this lake. And I'll also say that about our earlier discussion on the basin-wide management plan and atmospheric deposition, Mr. Chairman, probably between 2007 and 2010, somewhere in that period, this commission did have a specially called meeting of the air and water quality committees to build on the need for atmospheric deposition impacts in North Carolina. Obviously, it didn't happen. It's not addressed in the basin-wide management plan, even though it's been called for multiple times. I still would like to see a section in each of the basin-wide management plans dealing with the atmospheric role in water quality in North Carolina. This particular site has been the subject of a number of activities for both research and legal. It's one of those even before the Environmental Management Commission, I think in 2012, and I recused myself on that particular legal case because of the circumstances. But I think Division of Water Resources knows that there are air emission sources in that area, and that it could potentially be a deposition effect. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has talked about that for a number of years and conducted studies on it. This, to me, with the loss of submerged aquatic vegetation, is very similar to the types of issues that we saw in the Chesapeake Bay. And by reducing the loads of nitrogen to that bay, they found a dramatic restoration of submerged aquatic vegetation. It's been a success story. So I suppose my points are, one, that the Department of Environmental Quality should be involved in the restoration planning because of the nitrogen sources that need to be identified, quantified, and then in turn it probably is within the domain of the department to have some influence on the amount of that nitrogen that's entering this lake. Now, it could also be contributing, it could be the migratory fowl too, and we need to understand that as well. So I encourage the department to play an active role in the restoration planning.
Are you making that as a formal recommendation that we should take to the department, or what would you like me to do?
If the committee is so inclined to carry it to the commission, I can make that in the form of a motion. I don't know that the department needs that from us. I'd be interested to know why they haven't joined the planning effort.
Okay. Commissioner Gillespie.
What Commissioner Deerhake said is interesting, and I was supporting what she was saying, and I would expand on that maybe even more, but I'd like to ask a couple of questions first and then have some comments myself on it before we move ahead. So one of the questions I'd have is how did this item get on our agenda? Who requested, if you could say, for this item to be placed on our agenda, just for my knowledge? Does it come from the department wanted to update the commission, or did a member request it, a commission member? If anybody's at liberty to say how this got on our agenda.
I have no idea. Anybody? Yes, sir. Mark.
Mark Vandenborg, Division of Water Resources. This came as part of my presentation on updating the commission on algal blooms and how we're surveilling them. This was something I brought up as a point that we don't have control over some of the postings of harmful algal blooms. That's a state, federal thing. And that came out to be, well, what is the problem? And I think that's how this ended up as a 15-minute presentation.
So, Mr. Chairman, that helps me a lot because that was one of my concerns. And that explains exactly why this is here, is because he had that concern. So in my 20 years down here, I've never heard this kind of report on Lake Mesquite. And to me, this sounds like an alarming issue. And the reason it's an alarming issue to me is let's say that U.S. Fish and Wildlife all of a sudden, 2 years, 5 years from now, all of a sudden post that you can't use this for recreation or hunting or whatever, then we've got a major issue on our hands here. And Commissioner Keene, and I apologize for digging into an eastern issue because I'm definitely from the mountains, but I have been down there and I am familiar with how interested the state legislature is with making sure that Lake Mesquite is further developed. Wildlife Resources is getting ready to spend about $6 million on the facility down there and their long-range planning, and so this is a big economic driver for Hyde County, as Commissioner Keene has said and others have talked about. So, you know, restoring the water quality to make sure that no adverse effects happen outside the state's control from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we probably need to, somebody needs to tell us that we need to start looking at this and doing something. I don't think this needs to be the last time this committee looks at this issue because it sounds pretty alarming to me, knowing what could happen to Hyde County, because this is the major economic driver for that county. Is one, if I'm not correct, Commissioner Keene. I mean, this is critical. This area, this lake, and the activities surrounding this is all Hyde. There's more bears in Hyde County than there are people, and so they have very little down there and this is the biggest economic driver down there for them. And so I would hate to see, like I said, 5 years from now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Post says no more recreational use, and that cuts out all of that and all of the hunting and everything else that comes with it because you can't get into the water because it's a health risk. So what Commissioner Deerhake is saying, you know, I'm sort of in agreement that we need to, and somebody needs to tell us what we need to do if this is really an alarming issue as it sounds to me. So I'm open for, as a member of doing something to try to make sure that we do everything that the state can do to make sure that this improves, the water quality improves there for this, because I sure would hate to see it shut down as far as public health goes.
I'll take that as a second. Then.
Well, no, it's not a
Oh,
second.
okay.
We wasn't even, not even a motion, and not even up for discussion yet. We're just making, commissioners still making comments, so I don't know what the solution is. I think that a better motion that I would like is when if we get there, is for every committee member to speak their mind on this and let the department hear. And they're the smart ones. They're the ones we depend on, and let them come back and tell us what they think needs to be done based on our comments. Because this is still early. First, like I said, 20 years I've been here. I've never heard of this on Lake Mesquite, but I've been there. It's a very vital, important place in North Carolina. It's a place we need to preserve as good as you would a Grandfather Mountain or a Chimney Rock. You need to preserve and make sure this is natural resources there for future generations, and we sure don't need to sit here and hear what I think is alarming report and let it go.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, Mr. Rand.
Again, I'm Brian Rand with the Ecosystems Branch. I've arranged with Pete Caldwell to come. He's the refuge manager out of Mount Mesquite, and he's the representative that will come next month and talk to the Water Quality Committee about the public participation and the restoration plan that they've got going. Hyde County is a integral part of that planning. So their economic interests and the land use interests are being represented very well through the Soil and Water Commission, through the Hyde County Chamber of Commerce, and various stakeholders. So this is not a unilateral plan. We've helped them out as Lee said, scientifically with this, but because it is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge, we can participate and provide information to them, but we do not make land use decisions out there. That's there as the managers. They are working with their stakeholders. But I don't want it to be construed that Hyde County is not involved in this at all. They are very involved in it. And they are pulling people in from agricultural communities, fishing, as you can see, the Coastal Federation's involved, fishing communities, all that, to be part of this planning process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
My point about the Department of Environmental Quality's role is that the nutrient sources to which this could be attributed need to be understood, and they're most likely within the enforcement authority of the Department of Environmental Quality.
And I did, during Ms. Deemer's presentation, I mentioned that some cooperation between the Division of Air Quality and the Division of Water Quality to establish some wind rows data, I think, would be very helpful.
Well, there's already deposition monitoring data, as I understand it, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Pruitt.
I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm like Commissioner Gillespie. I'm from Western North Carolina. There are other natural lakes in the southeastern part of North Carolina. Is that right?
Yes.
Are they having a similar problem?
Some of the natural lakes are experiencing issues with algal blooms, but I would say that the problem is manifesting somewhat differently. But there are some natural lakes are experiencing algal issues, and others are oligotrophic and are not.
Could you put that back on the screen, the chronological data there that showed the change?
This here,
No, the one that has all.
the SAV, yeah.
It looks like from 91 until sometime in the early 2000s, things were fairly stable. What do we think happened, or have any idea what happened starting in 2014? It's different.
Like I said, I don't have a history with what's going on in the watershed to be able to speculate on that.
Well, that might be a question we should try and address. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I think the other part of that question is there are other bay lakes in eastern North Carolina, and I think the question is what can we learn about the management of other bay lakes, Lake Phelps, Lake Mesquite, Lake White Lake, all those other bay lakes. And I think it's an interesting question. So this was an information item, not an action item, but it sounds like we have a recommendation that we may want to take forward to the commission to get DEQ more involved in some of the assessments that are ongoing. Is that a valid?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If I may, maybe ask DEQ to, they've heard what we've said here, maybe come back to us, this committee again in November, and see if they have any recommendations or as far as us moving forward to address the committee members' concerns, all the committee's members that spoke up on this, and see what they're, how, best way to.
Is that a motion? Do we have a motion to request DEQ to come back to us in November?
If Commissioner Deerhake, I'd yield to her. I mean, I don't want to get.
I don't think we need a motion. I think we can just ask the staff to convey that to the leadership to come back to.
That's
okay.
what I think.
I was just informed we don't need a motion, so I will convey to DEQ leadership, DWR leadership, that we get some additional information. Okay?
And may I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that there is a pretty rich history dating back to about 2010 with potential sources in that area that I think the department can tell us about.
Yes, ma'am. And again, I want to make sure that there's cooperation between water resources and air resources.
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
if I may, just in addition to what you have just mentioned and bringing the resources back before us, I would, as a commissioner on this board, would like to hear from Commerce of how the state would be affected, particularly this area, particularly this region, being that we are regionalization thinkers and just not a county, but what it does to the region, and particularly the resources that are needed to find the science that Commissioner Deerhake is mentioning, is certainly keeping the science into this, because it's something that other lakes may be using this as a model, that we could put together something that could help those other lakes who are experiencing maybe what has happened in 91 and maybe 93 or 87, 97, and then jumps up here to 2014 in a year, and the whole lake is contaminated. So, or affected, I don't use the word contaminated, but is affected by this algae bloom. So my concern would be commerce, certainly agriculture, and getting some feedback and make sure they're at the table every step of the way moving forward, because that's going to have an impact on the federal piece, looking at the state governance and saying, okay, what have you done, what are you doing, and what will you do to make sure that this is handled in the proper way moving forward.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other comments, other questions, other concerns? I will get with some representatives from DEQ and Commerce, and we'll see what happens. Okay, we're going to hear about the stormwater nitrogen and phosphorus accounting tool. Trish, I saw you there. You are. Hi. Trish DaCosta will talk with us about the SNAP tool.
Good afternoon. My name is Trish Darconti. I'm environmental program consultant with Non-Point Source Planning, and I'm here to share information on our brand new stormwater nitrogen and phosphorus accounting tool, which is a revision of other tools. So first off, what is the SNAP tool? So the SNAP tool is an Excel-based compliance accounting method for determining nutrients coming from stormwater for use with our stormwater rules. It estimates nitrogen, phosphorus, and runoff volume at the project scale, that is your development scale, loading before and after your stormwater treatment, if you have any stormwater treatment. It's anticipated to be required for use in fall's new development beginning April 2019, and also by use by UNC, because they're in the Jordan and they still have requirements for new development. And We would require it theoretically for Neuse, Tar Pamlico, and for the Jordan following rules readoption. And as soon as it's approved, we'd make it available for DMS alternative buffer mitigation credit for use statewide. So this tool was based on several other tools that have previously existed. We started off with the Neuse accounting method, which wasn't even really an Excel-based spreadsheet. Instead, it was just a series of instructions and a graph that you would use to estimate your nitrogen export from different types of development. And then you had different treatment efficiencies for different types of stormwater control measures. This will later evolve to an actual Excel-based spreadsheet for the Tar Pamlico rules developed by NC State. It uses the simple method, which is a very simple linear deterministic model for determining runoff. It's the same one that's used in Chesapeake Bay. And it uses a similar method of different nitrogen and phosphorus exports depending on the land cover type. And similar to the Neuse, it has SCM percent reductions depending on what you use. This tool was modified for the current tool that's in use in Jordan Falls, which they updated the simple method, they added stormwater control measure types, and so they keep the simple method for determining what's actually leaving the site, but they came up with a new approach for determining how well a stormwater control measure treats your runoff. And the concept is fixed effluent concentrations, as well as determining what proportion of the runoff that goes to the SCM actually is removed through infiltration and evapotranspiration. This is currently in use for new and existing development stormwater rules in Falls and to the extent that it was used in the Jordan. So what the SNAP is an update of the Jordan Falls rules that we've been working with NC State and Demler and stakeholders extensively. We've got a whole bunch of new scientific data that we've used to update the input variables. We've added a whole lot of functions and stormwater control measures and a whole lot of bug fixes, which I'm about to go through. So in general, let me describe how they work. So they are small scale. These are meant for less than 1 square mile, so very small sites, not whole watershed modeling. It's made for determining basically an estimate of your annual stormwater runoff volume, and then your different land cover types are assumed to have an average nutrient concentration that comes off. So it is weighted by that proportion of land cover that's in your project area. As I mentioned, the earlier methods used a percent reduction for how well your stormwater control measures worked. These later methods for the current one in use, Jordan Falls, and then the SNAP tool combines this fixed effluent. It's assumed that through the stormwater control measures life that it has an average concentration that it can reduce to, and it can't get any lower than that. And then there is the amount of runoff volume reduction that it can also provide. The SNAP tool also adds results in order to compare what your input data is to load targets for your watershed, for buy-down targets, and it will give a load balance. That is a load credits or debits depending on if you've accomplished what you're aiming for. So just to go over real quick, so this is the concept that's currently in use in Jordan Falls, and it's going to be same with SNAP, where the different hydrologic fates are compartmentalized between, you've got your inflow, and it's split up into evapotranspiration and exfiltration or infiltration, your overflow, and your treated volume. And that effluent concentration is applied to the treated volume. And then between the inflow concentration, it's overflow, and the treated volume, you have your composite. So we have a considerable number of improvements in the SNAP tool compared to the Jordan Falls model. First off, we had a whole bunch of new land cover nutrient export data to incorporate and to give us new event mean concentrations for the different land cover types. We condensed, we had a whole bunch, like over a dozen different land cover types for the Jordan Falls that we condensed down to a very small number because we didn't see that there was any real significant difference in their results. We expanded the number of SCMs out to 21. We have a whole bunch of new data on those SCMs. And we enabled a much more variable types of design. So several of them have specific modifications that you can add to them that improve or change their functionality. For almost all of them, they have the ability now that you can calculate your under and oversizing. If you don't have the space or if you have extra space and you want to treat more than what is required of you for your new development site, or if it's an existing development retrofit, maybe you can't fit the entire 100% size, now we're able to actually calculate what proportion of that you're able to treat and then what that means for your nutrient treatment. And we have a whole bunch of new data on how these SCMs perform that was incorporated into their event mean concentrations. Then we have this whole new section where, and this is all optional, if you're using it elsewhere in the state, we won't be putting any of this in, but for the falls watershed, you'd be adding what part of the falls you're in. You'd be adding whether it's a new development or existing development and the type of development. Several other elements that are in the falls rules that help you navigate what your obligations are for treatment for this site. Depending on what you put in, you may find out that your site comes under the threshold for treatment altogether, and that any stormwater treatment that you provide is extra. So it provides watershed-specific compliance and tells you whether you've hit your targets for buy down, if you just want to buy down the rest of it, and whether you've hit your targets for your total treatment in case you don't want to do buy down. And then, of course, if you're doing existing development, then it will help tell you how much credit you can earn by this essentially overtreatment. So previously it was just for use in Jordan and Falls, and it's been expanded to be functional across the entire state. Obviously, across the entire state you don't need to use it. Right now in the Newsom tar-pamela coat would be advisory. You can use it to estimate what you might get with the new tool. In other parts of the state you might use it, for instance, if you're making an application for a 319 grant and you want to determine what installation of an SCM is going to provide for nutrient reduction. So you can use it in a lot of different ways. And we made a whole lot of improvements to make it much easier to use and to reduce bugs. There are lots of little errors that can be found throughout the spreadsheet. Much simpler layouts. They're easier to read. They print out clearer. It's much more intuitive. You don't have to have a user manual, although there is a very extensive user manual now for if you want to do much more complicated estimates and calculations. It's got an automated nutrient offset reporting form, so you no longer have to take what is the outputs from the Jordan Falls tool and then go to the watershed-specific piece of paper and enter all of this stuff in. It's got extensive error checking and user feedback, so it helps you determine whether you've entered things or things aren't matching between the different spreadsheets. And as I noted, a whole lot of bugs were found and fixed. So one of the real additions to this was the ability to under and oversize your SCMs. And so this was developed with NC State and Demler, where we had a whole lot of performance information from different sorts of SCMs. So this is an example equation that was based on a whole lot of data for different sizes of wet ponds, wetlands, and other detention types of SCMs. So we grouped the SCMs depending on how they behaved. We have 60-hour detention type SCMs. We have 12-hour rate type SCMs, and we have other couple different types that therefore have a different curve based on actual studies based on how much of their incoming average annual volume that they actually treat. And here's an example of the simplified project info data entry sheet. I've simplified this down so that you don't have to be an engineer to add just this even most basic information. A town planner could enter this, or even your landowner could enter it just to provide the basic information on the size and the project area, whether this is a new development or existing development, where it is. And so I've added a whole lot of things here to make it standardized across all of the sheets. You have certain colors of buttons that all take you to different sheets. Things that are in yellow are absolutely required in order to make the spreadsheet do any calculation at all, without entering those as the bare minimum for you to get numbers out of. However, if you want to do the calculation for your watershed compliance, then you need to add all of that extra green cells in there and fill all of those in. And if you haven't entered all those in, then it won't give you a result. So it makes sure to avoid calculation errors by making sure that you've entered everything that you need to do. And to make it easier for you, it gives you all kinds of drop-down menus, fly-over descriptions of that's what those little orange dots are right there, those little flyover, so that you can get an explanation of what that cell is. It'll tell you whether data that you've entered doesn't match or doesn't make sense. For instance, your disturbed area can't be larger than your project area. Because this model is not accurate at larger than 1 square mile, it'll tell you whether, and that's the case. You can use it for 1 square mile. It'll give you results, but it's not a good idea. It's got on the right side are orange buttons that help give you help information. It'll pull up either the user manual, or one of those is an online map that helps you actually get the watershed information just from an address. So here's that online clickable map. You can enter your address and go straight to it and get the latitude and longitude in decimal degrees, which you can then put in. What the colors are showing on here is the average annual rainfall across the state, and what those little dots with the names next to them are all of the precipitation stations. So one of the things you need to do is you need to pick the precipitation station most appropriate to your site. So you can use this to see, well, I'm closest to, say, Concord, and that's the one that I would use. Or in the mountains, it can be a little bit more challenging, so the one that's closest to you may not be actually a similar rainfall amount. You want to pick one with a similar color. And then the green lines there show the different watershed boundaries and sub-watershed boundaries to help you determine where exactly you are, and you can enter those specifically. And we had originally prototyped it with the Neuse, Jordan, and Tar Pamlico, so they're still in there, and you can still pick them, but right now they're for demonstration purposes. Here's an example land cover data entry sheet. Again, it has a consistent look and feel across all of the sheets. It allows for custom land covers and for special site conditions. For instance, we had a solar installation that was asking us how they handle the gravel that's under their solar. As you can see, it's a very simplified set. We used to have well over a dozen different types of land covers. Now it's very simple. Those little orange dots are definitions for each of the land covers. So if you're not sure what your land cover is, you can fly over that and get a good idea. And then it will help you check whether your pre-project and your post-project data are matching so that you don't have any data entry problems, as well as checking against the general project sheet, because your disturbance thresholds need to match. And here's an example results sheet. It breaks it up into just your general project summary information, where it reiterates what you put in. This is what's used to determine your compliance for your watershed. And then it also gives you the, just the facts. Are you getting your to your buy down targets? Are you getting to your load reduction targets? And what is the treatment balance leaving the site and arriving at the lake. It also gives you a general nutrient export summary, both before project, after project without SCMs, and after project with SCMs. The blue text draws your attention to the most important results. We usually talk in terms of your loading rate, which is pounds per acre per year, and your total load, which is just pounds per acre per year. And the rules talk in those two different terms a lot, so that draws the attention to those lines. And then when you have reached your buy-down targets, if you put all that information in, the line will turn green when you've reached that. So we have a whole bunch of new SCMs. We had several in Jordan Falls tool, as you can see on the left there. And now we have a whole bunch of new ones. We have bioretention variants and permeable pavement variants. We have two different kinds of pollutant removal swales, variations on sand filter, infiltration systems, disconnected impervious surface, floating wetlands for wet ponds, level spreader filter strips, Silvacell, and then you can do a custom SCM. The custom SCM means that if we have any SCMs that are approved after we get this out, then it's very easy for us to issue instructions for how you add that SCM as a custom SCM. So that way we don't have to try and issue a revision quickly if we have an SCM, like a proprietary SCM that doesn't quite make it, they're not quite ready before we issue this or issue any other revision. So till now, it's pretty much been just used for new development and by the project designer, but it's a little bit more advanced now even for new development, since it gives you your results immediately and you can tweak things very easily. You can do all kinds of small variations in your design. You can say, let's see what happens when I change whether it's forest, go from lawn to forest for my permeable areas, or whether we have 50% more parking area. You can do it just immediately. You can test a whole different set of SCMs instantly. You can clear out the set of SCMs that you have without affecting your initial project information, so you don't have to clear everything out. You can clear just sections and test it. Then and immediately see what your results are. For the local government, even if they don't have to use it for new development rules, such as in Jordan, I understand that there are still a lot of the local governments are still very interested in using it just to track the site load reductions. And I know they are interested in just keeping up with that, because you don't have to make sure that you're hitting any particular loads. You can just see how much is reduced, and there's an easy export function so that you can export this to a database. For existing development, then again, you can easily test different retrofitting methods, whether if you don't actually have space for 100% sized SCM, you can go down all the way to 50% undersized, see how it's going to work for you. And then, of course, for the watersheds where you have any sort of existing development reduction requirement, then you can document what your retrofit reductions are using this. You can also use it for, as I noted, grant reporting and watershed restoration. So if you're doing a watershed restoration plan and you have several SCMs of a certain type, you can do some estimates, and you can use it en masse that way if you wanted to. So a whole lot of effort and working with lots and lots of people went into this. It's been going on since I've been here for at least 2.5 years, and really it's been going on longer than that. But most recently, in the past 2.5 years, we worked with Demler and matching it up with their minimum design criteria, and worked with them and with NC State on a very systematic SCM crediting approach, including all of those curves for undersizing and oversizing, as well as a standard documentation for how all of these SCMs do their treatment. NC State did extensive literature search for the data and advised us on the different event mean concentrations and hydrologic partitioning, and as well as the land cover nutrient concentrations. I had an extensive list of requests from local governments on specific tool functions, so I incorporated those everywhere I possibly could. And the whole goal was to make it something that was really easy to use, where you didn't have to reference any instructions if you didn't want to, just to get it to work in a most basic way. That it gives you the best stormwater science, the most recent that we've got. Lots of options, so it doesn't have to be just for new development, but it can be for all sorts of different uses, and applies statewide. So we've also had pretty extensive vetting. We've taken it to the Nutrient Scientific Advisory Board, both in fall of 2016 and in winter of 2017. We've had two 30-day informal comment periods, also in fall of 2016 and spring 2017. And almost all the comments were technical bug reports. I had an extensive army of bug testers and other people telling me what things they would like to see or how it's not working for them. And consistent, strong interest from local governments, consultants, and DMS. Some of them are using the draft version now for planning because they really, really want it. And review by the DWR director before it's approved. So right now the draft is what's available on that URL, but when it's released, it will be available there. So I'll take any questions.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. That was a good report. It reminds me of 20 years ago when they were talking GIS and said, let's just get out there and learn what all that's about. In the planning sector, though, comprehensive land use plans in those areas that are in yellow that were highlighted, high need there. With that said, the tool as it presents itself is to be used throughout the state, and as you mentioned, in some areas more than others. So I guess the task would be to formally educate right away those planners within those governances in those areas that are highlighted the highest, best used for planning and the nitrogen buy downs, the poundage expense and so forth. That is expensive. In some areas it's going to be high end, and some of those high end areas need commerce the most. And the planning departments within commerce in those counties certainly will need to know and pass this on to those land owners and those potential land users, the end users, for projects that they're trying to bring to their counties in commerce particular, and the infrastructure that is needed in that arena, in those working areas. So I guess my question would be, after that comment, would be, how is the department going to implement, what's the strategy to bring right away this information once we get it going and moving forward? What is your strategy to inform the governances, and what part of the governance will you focus on?
Okay, so I've already been working with Demler. They have welcome to the MDC trainings that have been going on for the last 2 years, and I've been invited as a speaker to demonstrate them. So a lot of the consultants and local governments are already familiar with it. We also had an explicit training class in this last winter, specifically just on the SNAP tool. So a lot of the engineering community is very exposed to it. I've also made presentations to American Public Works Association North Carolina section for their Stormwater annual conference. So I've also done outreach that method. However, specific to the planning departments, and there are a lot of little things in this tool that are specific to help them review a project against how they're going to need to look at what a person submits against how they review the rules and how their local ordinances may affect it. So our initial plan is to have targeted training for the actual reach out to the planning departments of the local governments in the Falls watershed and ask that they send at least 2 planners, not necessarily their stormwater engineers. They can send their stormwater engineers if they're not already exposed to it, but we would ideally like 2 new people who haven't been exposed, so that I can walk them through this, and so that people that are not just engineers know how this works. Because those are the people that are going to be the front line talking to, especially the smaller landowners, and saying, this is the kind of information that we need from you, and this is how you get it. Because not all, a lot of these smaller projects may be just over the threshold for requiring stormwater treatment. If they're very small, they won't, and they'll probably just encourage them not to do it. But if they're above a certain threshold, then they'll probably want you to do it. So that's our first direct training. Of course, as soon as this is approved, I'm going to be issuing a memo, an announcement memo, to all of the stakeholders that I have, both contacts listed for the local governments in Falls and Jordan, because they're still very interested in it, as well as Upper Neuse River Basin Association. Those people tend to overlap a lot.
Right.
But nevertheless. And then we have a larger stakeholder list that is associated with the Nutrient Scientific Advisory Board. Okay. And it's more than just the members, it's a large number of people. I could also do a presentation at the North Carolina WRI annual conference coming up in March. It's time to submit abstracts, so that's another easy way to do outreach. Of course, I've got contacts at the local universities already, professors that I've talked to, because some of the people that use it are actually their students that want to have an easy scoping tool for doing smaller estimates.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's very impressive. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Forgive me if I missed it, but does this tool have a cost calculator component, a feature to it for cost estimating?
It does not have a cost calculator. There are several of the ones that are like this do. There's an EPA one that is very similar. The cost calculator would need to have several things, and it doesn't mean we rule it out. Maybe we do it in a future version, but this is what it would require. It would require both the initial construction and material, both the material and labor costs. It would have to include land costs, and it would have to include maintenance costs. And that's just the basics. I know there's additional costs, and when in my previous employment I looked at doing retrofit projects, there are actually a whole lot of other costs and problems that come in, especially when you're talking about a retrofit project. It just comes in from everywhere. So we could possibly do that. If there's an interest, we could ask the users if that would be of value to them.
And for those who are just interested in exploring low impact development measures, they can go to the National Stormwater Calculator to find a cost estimator, a cost calculation tool just for that. It's not a true engineering estimate, but it's an exploratory options analysis tool that they could use.
Yeah, the EPA has several tools for different scales of watershed assessment, whether it's site level or medium to larger size watersheds that allow you to do that sort of thing. There's several.
Dr. Meinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of sort of nerdy questions. One is on the under and oversizing. Is that, it said 50, 60, 70%. I should know this, but percent of what?
It's the percent of the required treatment volume.
Okay, and the percent required treatment volume is based on average annual rainfall?
Yes, but, okay, so if it's in the coastal counties, you have to treat the first 1.5 inches.
The first, the so-called first flush.
And in the rest of the state, it's 1 inch. And we've calibrated this because there is a difference in the rainfall, and about at the coast it gets a bit wetter. Looking at
now.
Yeah, for now. And it is a little bit different when you get to the mountains. It's kind of a mess. So there is,
That's a technical term.
Yes, Highlands is very wet. So it's calibrated to that difference, but it's based on the annual average rainfall that comes to that site. And so it's assumed that those coastal counties are already dealing with that larger average annual rainfall. That's what that 1.5 inches
Right.
is about versus the rest of the state.
Well, that's where I was going with my question, because in stormwater events, you tend to get, obviously, more of the stuff you would rather not have at the beginning of the storm. And if your movement for average annual rainfall is for more erratic precipitation patterns, even if you had a similar annual number, that would affect the design of the, potentially could affect design. But it sounds like this is already incorporated into that, and the sizing is really gauged on the first percentage of the storm and not so much on everything that comes after it.
Exactly.
That's a very poor explanation, but.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. The other question is, do you see this tool as having potential utility for basin planning or for TMDLs?
For basin, well, I'd say for basin planning or TMDLs or watershed restoration plans, I would say when you're getting down to the small scale, yes. Once you've determined that stormwater is what you got to deal with,
Right.
then what we're really seeing just looking at a whole bunch of these sites is you already know you want to target your higher impervious surface sites, that you're automatically going to get more bang for your buck in terms of treatment that way.
Okay, so this is really kind of a retail tool more than it is a watershed scale planning tool.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, thank you very much. Very good, very nice work, very impressive.
Great, thanks.
Other questions, concerns, comments? This is an information item. If none, I have a question.
Okay.
I heard a lot about outreach to planners and engineers. Any outreach to local elected officials, city council, county commission?
We haven't planned any yet. I suppose we could.
Well,
we'd
if
have
you
to
do, what I
some
strongly
education.
suggest you do Snap Light.
Yeah.
Okay.
I expect that we probably want to wrap it up with some update on everything else going on with the rules. So, for instance, since Falls is being implemented, that we probably, and we have a good outlet right now that we could go through the Upper Neuse River Basin
Yeah.
Association to talk to their elected officials and talk about any updates to the rules and how this fits in. I expect that certainly as the Jordan rules are going to have a relook, I know that there's some discussion of stakeholder involvement and outreach, and that I fully expect we're going to be talking with some stakeholders, but I don't know whether that's going to be elected officials or not.
Okay. Yes, sir, Mr. Gillespie.
What Ms. Trish's group's done is pretty amazing in the 2.5 years that they've been working on this, and I think it was probably a legislative mandate, and it's probably about 20 years too late. I wish we'd been doing it about 20 years ago. Then they'd be way further ahead in these new SNAP tools that they have, because these are very important to us. So I want to make sure, my comment would be is I want to make sure you're going to continue to do what you're doing as aggressively as you have these past 2.5 years, because you've set something in place, like I said, that should have been done in the mid-90s, started back then, but it's took us 20 years to figure out how to start moving this ball along to get to where they are now. They've made tremendous progress. So there's a lot of people, local folks, and everyone, all the engineers, everybody's aware of this. A lot more people are aware of this than you'd be surprised, because it's so critical for us, especially with the rules. And so just like I would encourage you to do more test projects on existing developments as far as retrofitting, and try to find local communities that will partner with you to do test projects so that you can expand the tools even further. So, and keep state involved, of course, too.
We're very fortunate. We're working very closely with Dr. Bill Hunt at NC State about this, and he's always talking to anyone who will put in an SCM that he can monitor.
There you go.
So in fact, we're working with, we know that Dr. Hunt's working with Durham on some particular SCMs that need a little bit more attention and study to get a better understanding of how well they perform, so that we can improve their their performance, if it's suspected that they actually perform better than the information we have so far. We're also been talking with NC State and Demler about expanding this for purposes of evaluating runoff volume match. It's going to take a lot of work. Our initial assessments mean that we're going to have to really get more data to evaluate how well that works. But it's promising so far, what we've got, and I would expect that's what we're going to be working on for the next 2.5 years after we get this version released.
Okay. Other questions, concerns, comments? Commissioner Deerhake, you're the vice chair. Do you have anything that you would like to say?
Thank you. No, I appreciate this very informative agenda today. Thank you.
Thank them. Counselor, have we been legal all hour and a half, 2 hours? Have we been legal?
Until the court rules otherwise.
Okay, good. I'm safe. And again, thank you all. I think interesting discussion on some items that have to go forward, some lab rules, and the Basin Commission report, the algal bloom issues, and we will contact DEQ. Linda, you're on record over there about some of those activities, and then the SNAP program, the Stormwater Assessment Tool. Thank you all very much. I don't have anything else. Anybody for the good of the order? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Saturday afternoon.
Oh, where are you going to stay? Oh, take a week?
Thank you, Counselor. I have leg cramps, and yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So not this Saturday, but
Yeah, a little.
So I was going to say, it's not this Saturday, but next Saturday. My niece will be getting married there. I'm going to take a walk out there.
For Lois, would you sign this? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is the girl, right?
No, this ain't. This is my second favorite. My other favorite is 17. Yeah, that's my favorite. But this one we have to register too. And she's getting married to boy, it's gonna be something else. Her husband is and so her husband to be. So you talk about a culture shock when his parents come down and meet all of us.
Not necessarily, not the built one.
Yeah, I know.
They might live on the Hudson up
That's
there.
my wife's brother's daughter, so they're paying for it. They're putting on a big show for it. So this can be a big show.
You're going to be sitting front row.
I went yesterday, Joseph A. Bank, pocket thing, scarf, new tie. My wife's got a new dress for it, and it's tie matches her dress. That's what I went yesterday for. So it's going to be, they're going to serve lobster.
Yes, sir.
150. So take your wife there. It's gorgeous. And go to Sierra Nevada. Go to Sierra Nevada. Have you heard about it? Oh, what is it? It's a brewery. It's the East Coast Brewery. You've got to go. Yes, near the airport. You have to. Have you been there?
Near the airport? I'm sure.
This is amazing. This facility is absolutely amazing.
It's called what?
Sierra Nevada. You'll have to go.
I will. Beverly loves craft beer. Beverly loves craft beer. I don't.
I guarantee. I don't know how many acres is on the roof. I bet you 20 acres on the roof. The whole East Coast Brewery. They take tours. People are being bussed in there. You've got to do it for lunch one day or dinner.
Make a reservation for dinner. Nice.
You don't have to. They see 600. 600.
Stay away.
No, there's going to be lots of people there. There'll be thousands of people there every day.